Good afternoon, everybody. Chris Frew here with BioBuzz for another episode of What's the Buzz. Today, I'm very excited to welcome to the show Michael Nestor, who is board director at National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, as well as the chief science officer at Autica Bio. Michael, welcome.
Hi, how you doing? Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. It's been a long time since yesterday.
That's right.
Michael and I were both at the Biohealth Capital Region Forum yesterday, along with probably many of you. So before we get in, Michael, let me go through just a little bit of housekeeping for everybody. So for those of you tuning in for the first time, What's the Buzz is our opportunity to talk to ecosystem builders, right? So we focus this conversation on people that are building and influencing and impacting the innovation ecosystem, which you'll get to know Michael and really understand how he is really a leader in influencing the innovation ecosystems. So we talk to builders, people that are helping you grow your companies and putting the infrastructure together to make sure that we can take more medicines to market. Our event is sponsored by CRB, design engineering firm, who, if you've tuned in before, I always say they are really the ecosystem builders. So if you look around, many of the labs and manufacturing facilities across our region and many regions across the U.S. are built by CRB. They're one of the top leading design, engineering, and construction firms focusing almost exclusively on life sciences. So we really appreciate their support. They've been a longstanding sponsor of BioBuzz, and they support this show every week with us. So thank you to our friends at CRB for building our ecosystem and giving us the facilities we need to continue to grow and make medicines. So with that, Michael, let's jump in. Could you just start off giving everybody a little bit of your background and just kind of the work you're doing across policy innovation over the years?
Yeah, and thanks again, Chris, for having me. And I know you and I talk a lot, and it's been a while getting this together, and I'm really happy to be here. So, so I like to think of my career as a Venn diagram between three general areas. So, of course, there's the science and research, which is my one part of that Venn diagram. So I'm a human brain stem cell brain organoid person. Really was part of the early advent of the field, so I've been able to watch that grow during the course of my career. So I started in a more of a traditional, and I'll put that in quotes, academic track, because I've always been at the intersection between biotech and academia. And that's mostly because stem cell research, especially early in the field, was extremely expensive, had to do it mostly outside of university settings. I had the unique opportunity to be part of a very unique lab called the New York Stem Cell Foundation. And I know it sounds like it's a foundation, but it's actually a research lab. What we used to refer to as a safe lab. It was started really by a connection between the Harvard Stem Cell Research Institute, Columbia, and some private donors, when the using embryonic stem cells in research was a bit of a policy gray area. And I'm alluding now to what the second part of that Venn diagram is. But I got to go there as a postdoc because I wanted to do human stem cell research. I wasn't able to do it at the time at NIH. And I got to see a very unique model that at the time was very weird, but over time has actually become much more part of the norm and has been a huge influence for me. And that was this sort of private lab, private-public partnership built around bridging what we all call the valley of death. And how do we take academic research and really move it very quickly into the commercial space while still maintaining the basic research piece? So that's the science part. And of course, I continue that work. I continued that in a traditional sort of tenure track path, and then I stepped off of that track and spun out a couple of companies, the latest of which is Autica Bio. Because I'm here in my National Academies vein, I cannot really talk too much about Autica. Want to respect any conflict of interest there. So just to mention that is part of my journey, and I still do that work, and it's an important piece of my journey. And then, of course, the second part of that Venn diagram is the policy, because whether I liked it or not, I was going to get dragged into science policy as a scientist because I was working in human stem cells. Now, I did most of my work in induced pluripotent stem cells, but where I was full of the cutting edge folks in the field of stem cell research. So we're talking about somatic cell nuclear transfer. We're talking about the early CRISPR folks. All of this stuff was happening in this lab. I mean, it was just a buzz of activity. And so I was really exposed to the challenges of working outside of an academic model while still having an academic appointment. And then the challenges and also opportunities of working in an area that had a kind of a gray zone from a policy standpoint. So I started to get into this, and at one point, my sort of hit the ground part of this was in 2014. I gave a scientific talk at a meeting where I was talking about the possibility of using CRISPR in human embryos. I was really focused on them being used in human stem cells as a way to develop a therapeutic sort of drug discovery platform. And I said, but I do think that, given the technology, we're going to be able to use it in human embryos sooner than we think. And I got laughed off the stage. I actually had a front row of folks that literally were laughing at me and said, this is a complete straw man argument and fear-based argument. And of course, we know what happened in 2018 with the CRISPR babies. So I then went on to write a book on the use of CRISPR in humans, because I started to really get engaged in the conversation that if we don't pull the lay public towards us, engage in these conversations early, then I used to have to make that case before our recent times, but you can see what happens when the lay public is not engaged scientifically, that they begin to mistrust institutions. Pre-pandemic, I would have had to spend 20 minutes making that argument to you. Now, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I wrote an entire book on how do we use CRISPR in humans from an anticipatory ethics standpoint, a policy standpoint, particularly focused on the use of CRISPR in brains, in mental states, because my area of research is autism, phenotypic drug discovery, brain organoids. I've been thinking about this for a while. And the argument in the book essentially was to break down 300 pages down to a couple sentences, if you could do that, is we have to have a special category for genes that are involved in cognition, because it's one thing to have a therapeutic or a cell and gene therapy for sickle cell disease or cancer. That doesn't necessarily change how we define who we are as a person. But if you start changing mental states, like treating depression or schizophrenia or autism, you are really talking about changing the brain, and our personhood is really intimately associated with our brain states. That's a different category. And if we don't tread carefully and involve the lay public in that conversation early, we could potentially be accused as a scientific community of sort of going off and kind of doing things without their engagement. And then that will come back to hurt us in terms of funding and those other sort of political aspects as well. So that's that. And then the last piece, which has really brought me to my role here at the National Academies, is really national service. So I really believe that scientists have an obligation for national service. So, I spent my career in starting out in a non-traditional academic model. I went to big pharma. The role before I had this one was helping to start the J&J site here in Washington, D.C. And then finally, the national service piece is working at the National Academies, thinking about the things like the future of U.S. innovation. And my motivation for doing that was actually my work at J&J. And my role at J&J was to go out and find new companies to bring into our pipeline so that they could be aligned with our therapeutic areas. I wanted to meet with PIs. I wanted to meet with folks that had new ideas. And, a lot of what I prided myself on was, you, Chris, might be the PI and you'd say, hey, I got all this data and here's my slide deck. And I'd find that really small thing that you ignored. And I said, that thing, that's the commercializable piece, the thing you're not thinking about. So I always really enjoyed that. But as you imagine, I'm sure you see this in your role as well, Chris, that there was a lot of disconnection between especially academics who had new companies and what they thought were important pieces of data, what their timelines were, what their expectations were, and what we as J&J wanted or needed. And so I started to think to myself, if you have that disconnect at the micro level, you start adding that up across an entire ecosystem, then you add that up across an entire nation. Well, it's no wonder we have a really highly inefficient system from getting our innovations out. And then we're competing globally with countries like China that are very efficient at that. So that's the national service piece. So I wanted to work on these issues. And GWIPR, which is the Government University Industry Philanthropy Research Roundtable, I've had a lot of practice at that, is where I am now working on those issues for the nation. And so that really brings together our leadership across the R&D ecosystem, puts them in a room. It's a closed door environment, not open to the press, and creates an environment where you can have a frank and open and honest conversation about not only opportunities, but where are there challenges and misalignments between all of these institutions and how it's holding us back. So I know it's a lot, but that's the that's the background.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, you've got such a broad career, so I appreciate you giving that context. And again, I just in summary, like you have that kind of early research, academic, public-private partnership element. You also have the policy side and science communication element of it, which you write about it, you speak about it. You have that, so I would say it's almost like a four circle Venn diagram. You have a commercial component to you that a lot of people don't have, right? That understanding of commercialization, not only living it, but you've been in big pharma, startup, you've supported incubators, and then that national innovation lens. So I would actually add make sure people see there's four circles there that you're pulling together. So I think it's a unique perspective. And what we wanted to talk about today was building, the future of U.S. innovation. So I think that today's discussion would be great because we're going to be able to blend all those together. So like from your perspective, and I think to what you just finished talking about, I mean, now more than ever, our industry is facing, some of the lowest investment, right? That we've seen in a long time, private venture capital investment, lowest participation in our public markets from a biotech index. Now we're seeing an administration that has kind of really shifted the focus around some of the grant funding approach, right? Mm-hmm. And on top of that, tariffs. So and what we've seen again, just from the public market, our U.S. index is flat, where China's public index is raised 145%,
right,
just this year alone. So you're seeing the inefficiencies really kind of come to light on top of a lot of these things that have a lot of these other kind of factors playing in.
Mm-hmm. So, and I will say, I would add, Chris, that a concerning headwind with that, just to before I forget to mention it, is this whole idea of offshoring with CROs in East Asia, and then them holding on to that IP and then bringing those IP, some of which have been straight stolen, back to U.S. markets and selling it to the U.S. consumer. I mean, I think that's a huge headwind that we haven't really discussed at a national level yet.
Yeah. So with all these headwinds, like I think, this is an industry that does need to try to find its new vision and find its new kind of footing on how, like, what's the next decade or next century of U.S. innovation look like. So I'm curious. So from your perspective, give us like, where is the state of U.S. innovation that you hear about in these roundtables? And then maybe like, let's dovetail that into like, what are the biggest challenges you're hearing, you're seeing that we're facing? If you could kind of maybe frame those two.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Chris, and I think that like you and I talk about this at a micro level, but I think what's happening in our region is very part of a national context, and so I think it's important to be able to go from the national to local and back and forth, and it's really hard to do. It is really hard. I mean, I struggle with it myself, and I'm sort of immersed in all of this. But I think what we are seeing, I'm going to give you the negative, but I want to give you the positive. So let me start with the negative, but I'm going to show you how it actually leads to an opportunity. I think we have a unique opportunity here in our region to think about it. But so obviously misalignment is a huge piece of the problem, right? Well, like I just described that misalignment between, startups that are coming out of a university that may think that they're, let's just be frank, a lot of these startups overvalue their IP. They think they don't do enough. They don't understand market research. They don't understand path to market. They don't look at their competitors, and they think, oh, I've got this novel technology. And of course, there's 100 other companies just within the region that have the same technology. And so if you look at it from a venture standpoint, and you're looking at it from a funding standpoint, you're saying to yourself, this isn't new, whereas the founder says this is new and novel. So there's that happening. And so how do we do a better job of that? And that's part of that's misalignment of messaging. And let me say it like this. I think it's also misalignment in terms of Pharma, who is the biggest acquirer of early stage startups from academia, does not do a good job coming to academia and saying, look, this is what we need. I know you have X, Y, and Z, and that's cool, and you can continue that, but we don't need that right now. Here's what the market wants. And I think on the academic side, there's a little bit too much of, well, listen, these are my ideas. This is what I've been working on for 20 years. This is the greatest thing, with a little with lack of a little bit of resistance to the idea that you might just have to put that to the side. You might just have to set that to the side and wait, or continue that with a different type of funding stream or a different type of approach than you have traditionally, and maybe do a little bit of pivoting to what the market pressures are going to be. So I think there's some work to do there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The way you framed that is like pharma coming to the table, and it's like reverse startup mentality, right? Start with the customer and say, what do you need? Let's dive in and make sure your research is geared around this, versus, let's just fund everybody to kind of dive into every little nook and cranny, and then hope that some of it comes out and pops out the other side that fits what pharma needs. So I feel like in more like lighter tech, like software, and kind of faster, even like some other deeper tech fields, I feel like that happens more, right? Is it maybe probably because there's a smaller development timeline? Like you can get to market with a new, software technology in months these days. And, but in our industry, it takes a decade or a half a decade. Did I frame that correctly?
I like the analogy you made. I do. I agree. I think that that part of the reason why it's taking so long is because the folks that are working on the basic research, which I want to emphasize is really important, the long-term risky basic research is really important, don't always have that market insight, and don't know what pieces of that basic research could be peeled out really quickly to spin up and spin out. And I think that's on industry. Industry has to do a better job. I think that the power dynamic is often that universities come to industry because they want money, and industry comes to universities because they want the university to de-risk something early. I think that there is too much of this or that, and not enough synergistic relationship building early on. So that, let me give you a concrete example of what I mean. Let's say you've got a startup, and I'm an industry person, and I know what the market is, and I know you're at a university, and you're doing really great basic research, and I see a piece of data that I think is really interesting that should be spun out and commercialized. I won't know that unless I build a relationship with you early on, and I'm kind of with you on your journey through your research. But industry doesn't do a good job of that. They only come in late in the game. And I think that that's an opportunity. There's an opportunity for relationship building earlier on, meeting early investigators at universities when they're young, and saying, hey, we're going to stick. I'm GSK. I'm going to stick with you for a while. Can I come over? Can we have coffee? Yeah. Can we hang out?
Well, I think we're talking about the future and the state of innovation in the U.S. I think this is a very important topic, and to also bridge the national to local. Like, we have some of the top. I mean, this is the top healthcare market in the world, right? So, there's and for a long time we were the innovator of the world as well, right? So, you have seen some change, right? So look, Eli Lilly's been in the news a lot lately, right? So they announced their Virginia Richmond site, which I was excited to be at the press release for, which is really exciting. They also were, I think it was earlier this year or last year, announced a long-term partnership with Purdue, where they committed $250 million over the next 8 years to accelerate innovation at Purdue.
Yes.
To me, that's like, I mean, is that what you're talking about, that we need to get to that? I mean, that might be like one large component, but it sounds like there's also like the coffee talks that it can happen in the meantime.
Yes.
So like,
yes. So yeah. Sorry, Chris. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. But I'm so excited about what you said, because that's it. There's an intermediate step. Everybody has the Purdue in their mind, right? And that is where we want to be. But to get there, you've got to have the relationships. And the relationships are hard to quantify. They're really hard, because it's in those relationships that you understand each other's culture. You understand what's important. The PIs would learn a little bit. The industry folks would learn a little bit about some technologies they may not even know about. But it's really it requires high touch, and that's difficult. So where I think there's an opportunity, so federal funding has fallen about 45% to about 34% between 2010 and 2022, and slightly more now. Interestingly though, it is not simply because it's fallen. It's fallen because there has been increased investment from industry in R&D. And so I think there's an opportunity to have R&D play more of a, where the federal government would influence academic culture, for example. And I know I'm talking about influencing academia right now, but it goes both ways. But this is the easy example to use. Government has influenced academic culture by how they write grants, right? Like what goes in an RFA or an R01 or an SBIR, that kind of determines the marketplace of ideas. There's a soft hand, an invisible hand of influence that occurs that way. I think industry could play the same role. They just don't know that they can. And I think this is an opportunity for our region because all of our pharma, our startups, our government agencies are so geographically close. So it's easy to hop in a car. You don't have to fly anywhere. You can hop in a car and say, let's meet up in Baltimore. Let's have a one-on-one. Tell me what you're doing. Again, really hard to do. It's hard work.
And, I like, sorry to interrupt. I like how you talk about the touch, because at the end of the day, we can't, like this is a relationship, everything, research, commercialization, it is built on trust. We're talking about large amount of investment, long-term thinking. So relationships are an important part of it. And so going back to that local, national, local, like that's where these local relationships can really kind of, to me, it sounds like, in just listening to where you're taking this, that's where those local relationships can really have an oversized impact.
Yes. And I think as we see the national funding start to dwindle and we get more to a regional, and I know BioBuzz does this really well, this really well, as we get to this more regional focus and we're thinking about those things, institutions matter less and relationships matter more. So I think we're at an inflection point in biotech where we're moving beyond the institutional piece of this and more into the boutique piece of it. And I think for some people, that's going to be very uncomfortable. If I'm sitting at J&J, I just want my spreadsheet of all the startups in the region so I can go out and do my coffee with. But that doesn't mean I'm going to close on that deal. And it doesn't mean that I'm actually going to understand transformative technologies because I'm just doing it from a 10,000 foot view level. I think we in Maryland can take advantage of, and I'm speaking as Maryland, but I think the DMV region in general is like this, can take advantage of the fact that it is very relationship built here. I have been and spent time a little bit, not ton, but enough in Kendall Square, which everybody talks a lot about, and I understand it very well. And that works because it is so concentrated in one area, and there are a lot of relationships. They look at the institutions and the names and they forget that it's you, Michael and Chris, having a conversation about something that you're doing. But you can't be afraid in that conversation, I think, on the industry side, to come in and say, I know, Chris, you're working on that really cool widget, but this is the thing we need. Can you do something in your lab for that? Because we can give you some money to do that. And you, Chris, as the PI, have to be open to saying, okay, I'll figure out how to fund that widget I love. But if this is what you need and this is what the market's going to bear, let me see if I can put some resources on my own and help you get it there.
Yeah. So, you bring up Kendall Square. What are regions doing well that align with the future of innovation, would align with this kind of track? Like, what are some of the things that you're seeing or you're hearing in your roundtables that, are creating that kind of that business-friendly environment, that collaborative approach, that feedback loop? Like what I'm hearing is like this feedback loop between industry and public-private partnerships and research. Can you talk a little bit about, like, what are you seeing that's working and maybe where are there opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this comes back to the panel I was on yesterday at the Biohealth Innovation Conference, and that is philanthropy. I think that the regions that are doing this well use private funding that is outside of these traditional government university academic spheres as a bridge builder between not only relationships, but projects. So for example, if I have a project that is a demo project, that's a little bit more risky, that I want to get some funding for, potentially to commercialize philanthropy in these areas. And I don't like to always use the example of Silicon Valley because, you know, we know that Silicon Valley is really unique to the cultural and economic and political environment that they were in. But one thing that is, I think, applicable is the idea that private funding can move something fairly quickly, and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the, or yeah, the perfect be the enemy of the good, and demo and get quick data and get quick turnaround, that I don't have to sit here and write a 30-page grant for. I think the successful places I've seen, Chicago is another one, where they're really leaning into private philanthropy. And what I talked about yesterday a little bit was the corporate philanthropy piece of this. And so to come back to tie these two pieces together, it's not as wishy-washy of just Chris and Michael getting together and talking about Chris's idea. It's, if I'm a corporate person with a corporate philanthropy, then I can come with some flexible money, and I can say to you, Chris, hey, why don't we explore that piece of data that I think that you don't think is that exciting, but I think is exciting as an industry person. Let's do a quick trial, or let's do a quick demo or something like that. And then we'll know at the end of that, with that data, whether or not it's something we want to take to the next step. Those ecosystems that have a philanthropic base are really the ones that are thriving right now. That's what I see.
Yeah, and so this is so different than corporate venture, right? This is corporate philanthropy. So do you have any examples of that? I mean, is this also like foundation philanthropy? Is this also like, you know, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society philanthropy? Is you know, Foundation for NIH? Are those the mechanisms? Just to clarify for the audience.
That's a great question too. So this corporate philanthropy is different than something like a family fund, or maybe you know, a society philanthropic organization. They have their role. They tend to be more focused in values investing. So the example of that would be something like, if I have a family fund, and you know, and I see this a lot in my area of research in autism, right? So often, or rare disease is a great example of this as well. I might have a child with a rare disease, and I want to make sure I'm getting a therapeutic for that disease. So any project that falls outside of that, I'm not going to be interested in. And generally, they don't have as much of a commercializable focus as a corporate philanthropy would. So the corporate philanthropies that I'm thinking about are things like the Novo Nordisk Foundation, things like Bank of America has a corporate philanthropy as well. I really, not corporate philanthropy outright, but Regina Dugan is leading the Welcome Leap. That is funded in some ways by philanthropy. These are organizations that have a commercial focus, but their money is highly flexible, and so it's not completely commercial. Now, the thing about philanthropy that's a challenge for many scientists and administrators is, unlike the federal government, you kind of have like 3 or 4 flavors of the federal government when you write grants, depending on federal agencies. This type of work is going to be very specific. So you may have different reporting requirements, different relationships for as many different philanthropies out there as exists. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, just, I know, do you have a hard stop?
No, I can go a little bit over. No, we're okay.
Okay. So the corporate philanthropy is interesting. That's definitely a new one. I think, you know, could stem some things for sure. We talked about kind of like the importance of the relationship, and especially tech transfer and giving the feedback loop to our researchers. You know, what are some of the other things that you've seen successful? Like yesterday, I mean, you know, I can refer to Maryland and Virginia. That's where I'm at a lot. And you know, so Maryland has tools like the biotech tax credit. Yes. So as a region, we can incentivize investment into a higher risk. We have platforms like TEDCO, which they invest a lot and they take a little bit riskier. And they also, you know, they also have an economic development. So they are a fund, but they have an economic development interest in the state. So those are a couple. And Virginia has, you know, the Virginia, you know, version of that has a Virginia fund that invests in Virginia as well. And so do you see those programs growing in importance, and states, do you see the importance of states with federal kind of decreasing? I mean, are those the tools that we need to think about? what else do you see that's out there besides kind of just what I'm aware of?
That was a great overview. I would add the E-Innovation Initiative Fund, which is another one like this. I think those are a good start, and I'm partial to all of them. I was an MSRF recipient. I love TEDCO. Everybody there does such a great job. I think they're really forward thinking. I think the investment incentive tax credit is really great, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We know, a couple folks that are really using that to launch companies, especially in the biotech space in Maryland. I think
and just a quick little plug, the TEDCO Expo is coming on October 21st. So if you're not familiar with it, come to Maryland. It's 1,000+ people that get together, and you'll be able to learn about a lot of these programs. Even out-of-state folks can take advantage of the stem cell research grants here and the BITSI grants. So for those listening, yeah, definitely look up and Google TEDCO and the Expo coming up in a couple of months, because there are some really pedigree programs that a lot of people can take advantage of.
No, it was great. I'm glad you said that, because the TEDCO Expo is, I mean, the energy of Maryland you can feel in that expo. I mean, if you want to go somewhere and really understand the folks that are trying to push it, that's the place to go. So I highly recommend it. I love that expo. And I always enjoy, going there, because it sort of reinvigorates me for the year. I missed the last couple of years because of work stuff, but, and I definitely have missed it. So, and as a neuroscientist, there's only one that rivals that, and that's the Society for Neuroscience Conference. But that's a 30,000 person conference. So, but those are the ones where I sort of mark my year with. So please do go to the TEDCO Expo. It's a great place to engage and network. And I would say, this is where I think we have an opportunity in Maryland. And this is what I was trying to talk a little bit about yesterday. And that is, we've got, I think, and if anybody from, and I can't make direct recommendations, that's part of my mandate here, but what I can do is suggest that we potentially look into working on bringing corporate philanthropy into biotech through legislation at the state level. I think the E-Innovation Initiative Fund is a good model for this, because it requires private endowment gifts to be matched with state funds, but it's very limited, and it's only connected with creating new chairs. So I have a good friend who's has received one of these, and I've been able to see it from the outside, and he's doing great, but it's very limited. And I think we need to do a better job of figuring out how to give folks within Maryland and external to Maryland places to put their philanthropic dollars where the state will match, specifically funneled into high need areas that are aligned with our regional needs. So one good one is biomanufacturing. Maryland has done a really good job trying to build out biomanufacturing, and actually, to bring it back to the national level, OMB and OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, just put out a memo this week on what the national priorities for the S&T landscape should be. Biomanufacturing is right there listed along with biosecurity. So wouldn't it be great if Maryland had a fund or some sort of mechanism where they could say to, folks that are here in the state, give back to the state on areas of interest to Maryland to create jobs here in Maryland through philanthropic giving. And then the other thing about philanthropy that's a little different from grants, and I think is really important here, is philanthropy begets philanthropy. It's like my friend who is a cardiologist says a negative thing about atrial fibrillation. They always say AFib begets AFib. Once you get it, it starts to accelerate. Well, the same thing with philanthropy. When philanthropists see an investment in an area, they rush in. So I think the state could play a real role in setting the stage. One connective tissue piece that they have right now, I think, is this working group on science and technology best practices. It was a set of legislation that was set to kind of create Maryland as a federal ready state. Right now, it sort of sets it up for the engines, the National Science Foundation engines, the tech hubs, the ARPA-H's. I would love for them to add into their philanthropy, and philanthropy as a driver of innovation within Maryland. I think Maryland could be really at the forefront of doing something like this through some of the mechanisms that already exist. I mean, I could see something like that already, TEDCO, which again, I really love the folks at TEDCO. They could add this through legislation to their mandate and specifically focus on philanthropic giving for our sector.
It's really interesting, and I've never thought about this before, but I have thought about philanthropy. I mean, for some of the projects we've worked on in the past, and I think five. Maryland, DC area has 5 or 6 billionaires who are part of the giveaway half your fortune club, right? So, and again, that's a thing, right? So there's a big philanthropic opportunity, and we are, again, I'll bring in a little socio-political things into this if I can, but we know that the top 1% have gotten wealthier the past 5 years than ever before in history. So to mechanize philanthropy for R&D and for commercialization of all times in history probably
That's right.
really makes sense, just from a common sense standpoint. Again, everyone has their opinion on it and top down and all that other stuff, but just the facts are is that there's more money concentrated in the wealthiest Americans than ever before. So giving a better way for them to put that back into new innovation, I just talking the first time that these neurons are clicking for me, but I think it makes complete sense.
And that's why we changed our name. Part of my strategic vision for what was GWIR without the philanthropy was to come in and sort of revamp it for the 20th century and 21st century, sorry. And part of that was adding philanthropy to the name to bring philanthropy into this national conversation. It's always been there, but it's been part of a larger tapestry. But to focus on it, to really, I love what you said, Chris, because it's so true. It is folks that are there's so much capital that's sitting on the sidelines, and folks want to give back. They want to be able to have an impact, a lasting impact. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday. It's not just in R&D, but training the future workforce. I don't see any problem with philanthropists coming into a university and saying, look, I know we need more of X, so I want to endow 100 undergraduates. They have to be named, the X person, blah, 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 blah program. But those folks are going to be on a track to build out a future workforce to get a result that we all need as a society within biotech. I think that there's nothing wrong with that. And this comes back to the beginning of our conversation and why I start with culture, because what we're talking about requires an openness for institutions to think about blurring the lines a little bit. And I think philanthropy is the potential bridge that could act as a line blur. You just have to be open to being able to experiment with that model. And I think the state of Maryland could set the stage for that experimentation through, programs that they put together.
I love this. Well, you got me thinking about a lot of stuff. I hope you got our audience thinking about, which I think you have, based off today's conversation, because it does, pain is a great driver for innovation, right? And this industry is gone through 3 years of pain. If most people in this industry are passionate about impacting health, impacting people around them, and it sucks to have everybody really kind of go through such struggle. But what we hope comes out of that is that we're innovating a better system, we're learning, we're getting creative, we're getting out of our traditional systemic way of thinking and doing things and really trying to think more efficient. So venture philanthropy or just targeted philanthropy at a state level with state policy, again, I think there's real possibility here. And again, if any time, it's when the pain's the most, is that people, universities who typically are make changes like turning the Titanic, hopefully are more apt to be able to kind of adapt to new things like this.
There are great innovative thinkers at our universities here in Maryland, and they're doing some great things. So I think now's the time. The mindset is there. And I will say one other thing: it's not just pain at the local level. We have to keep in mind we are in a global competition in the West with a country that can completely align their tech sector in one direction and do that thing if they want. And so what is our strength? our strength is that we've got all of these different folks with all of these different perspectives. But more importantly, we've got a whole panoply of investment products that we could be leveraging to really move our innovations at warp speed. And we're not leveraging the full basket of investments, and philanthropy is an important foundational piece of that. I will leave you with this, Chris, just to give you a little bit more food for thought, and the audience a little bit more food for thought. It doesn't stop there. I don't see any problems with looking into crypto funding scientific research. I don't see any problems with turning more towards private equity, and looking at loan guarantees, and really rethinking the entire way we're funding science, not losing the government piece, but instead of just a single like German chocolate cake. Wouldn't it be great if you had like the choice between like a German chocolate cake and maybe like a Boston cream? I'm hungry, so I'm using food. But you see what I mean, right? You want that smorgasbord available to you, because that way you have the most opportunity to get what you want and move this technology forward.
Yeah, and I agree, and I'm gonna put this out there also for the audience to think about. And I raise this alarm, as you know. I workforce is something I'm passionate about. I run a recruitment company. I've been in the staffing and recruiting industry for 20 years. We're also in a not only are we in a critical innovation kind of challenge right now for the country, but you know, I can speak to the DMV. Just over the past 12 months, we've lost about 1,200 private life science jobs due to layoffs, and as of 2025, we've lost somewhere between 5 and 7,800 or so are the numbers that we are hearing, government jobs in health related, so health and human service and CDC, FDA type of jobs. That's a lot of people. So you just say 5,000 people, just ballpark. There's not enough jobs to absorb that, even if you pulled together the East Coast commercial hiring. So the only way that we're going to get out of that and keep this incredible talent that we have in the U.S. is through innovation and new ideas like philanthropy. I just want to challenge people while we're talking about it, not just think about company creation, but job creation. And that the only way to create new jobs is to create new companies. Bottom line, like the current companies, big pharma, there's just not enough to absorb what's happened to our system. So I just want to put that out there as it's something we're working on. We've put some grants out there for, dual workforce and job creation and company creation programs. I think it's critical too. I don't see a lot of people talking about that, but startup creation, commercialization has actually never been more important as a country because of all the job loss, because we have brilliant people that I have people calling me from India and South Korea asking me to recruit U.S. workers for 2, 3, 4-year stints overseas. That's happening. If we're going to stay competitive as a country, we not only have to rethink these systems that you've shared with us today, but we have to rethink how we're going to keep our greatest asset, which is our people and the intellectual property that we have, the human capital we have. That's probably another 45-minute conversation.
And Whipper's done some work on that. Whipper has done some work, and we think a lot about workforce development like you do, Chris. And I think that's part of what this is. I think part of when we say rethink, it isn't just, hey, let's get more products out to the market. It is building a ecosystem that, and I don't like the word pipeline, but it's apropos here, building a pipeline that's self-sustainable, that capital from the federal government can come and go, but it is not the foundation by which it runs. And I don't think there are some people that are upset with that idea, and I certainly empathize. But it's just the reality in which we're in, and we have to figure out a way to sort of reconstruct it to work like that. Now, it doesn't mean we dismiss the federal dollars, and it doesn't mean that we can't have programs that are reliant on federal dollars. Like, to come back a little bit down to earth a little bit, there are going to be high risk, low reward programs that need to be done over time, thinking far into the future with not an immediate investment, return on investment. I do think the federal government still has a huge role in those, but those are limited in scope and what they are. Those are not going to be an entire ecosystem.
Yeah. Well said. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate you sharing these thoughts and the thought-provoking conversation. You know, you got me buzzing with some new ideas and some thoughts around here. So I hope there were some people that are tuning in today that are able to take some of this back to their spheres of influence that can start impacting the culture and ideas on how we really kind of build this ecosystem. So again, I really appreciate everything you do day in and day out as not only a job creator, as a product company creator, but a policy creator and a thought creator. So really
Thank you,
appreciate
Chris.
you being on today.
I enjoy BioBuzz. Thanks for all the work that you do. You do a lot, and really appreciative of it. And yeah, thank you for the time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, thank you all for tuning into this great conversation today. Please keep following BioBuzz. We'll have another episode coming up in 2 weeks, so keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, make sure you're subscribing. We have our weekly newsletter that goes out. We're publishing news updates and with interesting people like Michael, and really making sure you're caught up on what's happening in the local ecosystem every day. And again, doing our part to try to create jobs and help people get the jobs. So thank you all for tuning in. Until next time, I'm